Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to see you all on this webinar. My name is Marek Surma. I work in TSH as a programmer, as a software developer. I have over 10 years of experience in PHP. And today, I would like to show you the presentation on handling queues in Laravel. But first, I would like to tell you that the webinar is recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel later this week. And you will receive the link right after the webinar, so you will be able to watch this again. Please ask all your questions using the questions tab, which is not a chat window, it's the question tab. It would be much easier for me to find the questions there and answer them. I'll be answering the questions after I'm done with the presentation. The history of queuing as we know it today is quite young. Actually, here's what we can find in the 200 years old book titled The French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle. That talent of spontaneously standing in queue distinguishes the French people. So back then, using queues was not so obvious even in the physical world. Professor Nick Haslam from Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences also noticed the fact of using queues brings some valuable advantages into our lives. But the most important one is that people can access limited resources in a fair way when they use queues. Like bricks, for example. Each brick is a job to do, right? It has to be picked up and put somewhere else to make it useful. Could a pile of bricks be a queue? Well, not really, but if you have a few of these piles, then you can use them up in a specific order. Then it will be an ordered queue. Then maybe you could build something like this. This is an over 100 years old post office building. People had to use a lot of bricks and other materials, and they had to queue the job that they needed to be done and access the limited resources. Okay, so in the post office, there is a specific organization of the work, how it's done and how people perform their work. So on this schematic, you see a simplified version of what happens in the post office. Outside of the post office, we have the post boxes into which the letters go, and then some guy has to bring them to the post office, throw into the sorting bin, and in the sorting bin, this is also a kind of a queue. Well, not really, because it's not ordered, but we will talk about this later. And then another person has to take these out from the queue, from the sorting bin, and put them into the shipment bins, which also are a kind of a queue. So the job's waiting to be processed. And then they are just transferred to an appropriate remote locations. Okay, so the goal of today's presentation will be to show you how you can organize this kind of situation, but in Laravel. We will be modeling a few queues, the box, the sorting bin, and 3 of these remote locations so that they can receive letters. In here, you can see a short presentation on how the jobs are being processed. This is a simple script that I wrote so that I can show you how the jobs are processed with in case of two different balancing modes. In the brackets here is number of jobs to be processed. Sorry. Number of jobs to be processed. The progress bar is a visual representation of the same thing. But we'll come back to this later after we are done with this, with the code and all things that are required for this. Okay, we want to model this in the computer, so we would have to look at the differences between the physical representation of the queue and other things and the computer representation. So the queue in the physical world is a place where a number of elements can stand or be put into. Like people can stand in a queue, but also the letters can be put on some kind of a queue. In computer world, the queue is a place where you can store your jobs to be processed. And we need some kind of a storage for that. So we'll be configuring this in a minute. The job is something that in a real world can be done by a person, and the person knows exactly how to do the job. So in computer programming, especially in Laravel queues, this is not the case. So the job describes how it should be handled. The worker is, in Laravel, the worker is a moron, so he does not know how to do the job. Okay, so we go to the last element, which is the worker. And worker, as I said, in Laravel does not know how to do the job. It's only responsible for taking the job out of the queue, processing it, and maybe doing something else. It depends on your requirements. In real world, the worker does know how to do the job. So these are the differences. And we can move on to the configuration. So the first thing that we will need is the storage space of some sort. We have a few officially supported storage ways. The first one is the database, which can be PostgreSQL, MySQL, and so on. Beanstalk, Amazon SQS, and Redis, which is kind of a simplified solution. It's very fast, but it's using a very simple queuing mechanism that was built into Redis. Also, there is an unofficial driver and unofficial connection type, which is the RabbitMQ. I had a lot of questions about that. If this is supported, yes, this is supported, and can be the library for this can be downloaded from this repository that you see here. Okay, so let's go to the configuration of the queue itself. In here, in the configuration /queue PHP, you see that by default, if you don't have this queue connection set in your environment file, it will be set to sync. Sync is something that it's not really a queue. It just pretends that the queue is working. If you set it to sync, the job will be processed immediately after you try to drop it into the queue. So it's not really a queue processing. You don't need background processes for it. It will be processed directly by the same process, which is dropping the job into the queue. In the connections section, I shortened it a bit because there were other options here. In the connections section, you can see the database and Redis at the moment. I don't personally use the database connection. It can be used for a bit slower kind of processing. Redis is blazing fast. It's something that I chose for this presentation. Well, of course, you can select other options, especially if that's a dedicated mechanism, which, for example, Rabbit or Amazon SQS, that would be the best option to choose. Okay, so in here, we can define the queues that the Redis queue that will be processed. And also the other important thing in here is the failed jobs table, which is created in our database. So all the failed jobs will go there, and you will have a choice on what to do with them. I will talk about this a bit later. Okay, but what about other settings for Redis, like password and so on, because it's not here. Yeah, but in here it's only the queue settings. The rest is in the config database file. If you need to set that, it's in here. To create a failed jobs table, it's not enough to define it in the configuration file. You also have to run these two commands. The first one will create a migration for the failed table. The second one will pull this migration in, and you will be able to work with the failed jobs table, which is shown in here. So the failed jobs table will contain the connection name, which is Redis, for example, the queue name, the payload. So the payload is whatever you put into a job. It will be serialized and stored in here. An exception that made this job fail, and the date when it happened. Okay, let's have a look at the job class. So the easiest way to start using jobs is to just use this PHP artisan make job command from the command line. It will create an example job class, as you see in here. And here's the content of the file. So the example job has some essential things in it, but the ones that I want to concentrate on right now are the constructor and the handle method. So the constructor is everything that you want to do when you put the job into the queue. It will be run at that exact time. And the handle method is something that will be run when the job is taken out of the queue and is supposed to be processed. You can also define a number of additional parameters in a job class. For example, the number of tries, because you want to retry the job even if it failed. This may not be your fault or the fault of the code that you wrote. It may be the fault of some external services or something like that. You can limit the number of exceptions after which you want to make this job fail and go to the failed jobs table. Also, you can provide a timeout. So it's the time in which the job should be processed, and it should not take more time than this. There's a number of other things that you can define here, but to talk about them, all of them would take too much time for this presentation. But here's an interesting one. This is specific to Redis. You can allow 10 jobs like this to be processed every 60 seconds, for example. So if you have an external service which will not allow you to, for example, let's say it's an email provider. So you want to send emails to your customers, and you don't want them to, the email provider to be unhappy because you are trying to send 1,000 emails through their service in a single minute. Then you could use this, and it will limit the sending tries to 10 per every minute. So that's a great thing to use on Redis. Okay, so now after we have a place to store the job, after we know how the job is built, after the job class is built, we can try to put the job into the queue. So sending the job into the queue is quite simple, and you can define the name of the queue in which the job should go to. So job dispatch on queue emails. This will send this job to the emails queue. The second one will do the same, but will make sure that this job is not run sooner than 5 minutes from now. Also, the other one is about doing the same, but on connection Redis, because I didn't say that, but you can create multiple queues in multiple connection types, and they will all work at the same time. So you're not limited to Redis or Rabbit or anything like that. You can run all of them, and they will all cooperate properly. So this is the string that is taken out from the Redis database, and it represents the job that is put in there. And in here, if you tried, you could find the definition of your object from this job class. And you have to be very careful, because if you put a lot of information into the object, when you put it into the queue, it will take a lot of space. So your performance of this whole queuing mechanism will go down. But of course, it's not very critical when you are not trying to put a lot of information in there. Also, if you would like to, for example, attach a given Laravel model, an eloquent model in here, let's say it's a user or something like that, and Laravel knows exactly that this user has an ID, and what it will do, it will put the ID of the user into this string. It will not serialize the whole object and put it in here, because it might be too much, but it will just place the ID of the user to this queue. And this appears to be really great, but you of course have to be aware of the fact that the queued job may be processed tomorrow. You don't know. Maybe you know. Maybe you put such limitations that it will not be run tomorrow. But if you don't put limitations, it may be processed tomorrow. And in the meantime, your user object may change. So this is, you may have a need for sending, for example, some reports. And today you have some data in the user object, which is valid for the report. But tomorrow it may be invalid because it's already changed. So the report may go with some data which you didn't want to send. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so after we have the job in the queue, we dispatched it to the queue. we would like to work on it. We have to somehow make Laravel aware of the jobs in the queue. And in order to do that, we run a background process somewhere on the server, background process, which is disconnected from any other processes for the customers for the front end. So the easiest way to do that is to run the PHP artisan queue work, which will work on the default queue. But since I usually work with many queues, I do something like this. I run the queue work, but with the definition that I want this to be taken from the Redis connection, and I want to work on these particular queues. Okay, and if you ever want to update your jobs on the production server or anywhere, you will have to run PHP artisan queue restart. Or also you can stop the process, the queue work process somehow, and restart it manually. But this is the convenient way, and you should be using this when you want to deploy something to production, for example, or something like that, if you really have to work on the live servers. Okay, there's also other way of working with queues, and it's a Laravel Horizon. So this is the configuration, a part of the configuration for Laravel Horizon, and you can see that in here you select the connection type, you define the list of queues that you want it to work on, and the balancing type. Okay, so this is how the Laravel Horizon looks like. And currently, the thing that you see on the screen, this is often a kind of a trap for beginners, because they would think that it already works. But after you install this, according to the installation guide on the Laravel Horizon page, it's very easy. You will see this screen, but it's not all. It means the status here inactive means that something is missing. And I will show you exactly what that is in a minute. This is the next interesting screen. This is the list of pending jobs, or maybe I'll come back to this one. Okay. This is the list of the pending jobs. And here's the most important for me and most interesting part, which is the failed jobs screen. And this is the screen for one of the failed jobs. It describes why the job failed. So it's really nice if you add a custom exception for that, so that it describes exactly what happened. And also here at the bottom, you don't see that, but there's an information about the content of the job that was supposed to be processed. Okay, so what's missing? In Laravel Horizon, you have two parts. The first part is the front end, which is running without doing any other job than installing this. But the other part is the backend, I would say, the server side part, which is a special process that is a worker on the background. And to run it, you have to run PHP artisan Horizon. It will start the worker. And if you want to close it, you can run Horizon terminate. And after you run the background worker, the status will change to active, and it will start accepting jobs from the queues. By default, it refreshes the page every 5 seconds, but it can be changed somewhere in the manual. Okay, So let's go back to our post office model. So we would like to build a few queues for this particular construct. And the first one will be the post box into which we throw in the letters. The second one will be the sorting bin. And there will also be 3 queues for the shipment bins that are supposed to go to different cities. And first, we will have to create a letter class. So there's a very simplified letter class here. Nothing fancy, actually, but there are a few fields in here which are important, and we will be filling them in. The first one is an ID of the letter, the city in which the letter should go, the recipient, and a stamp. The stamp is a string which will just make sure that the letter is not sent for the second time, just like the postman or the post worker is placing a stamp on the letter so that it cannot be sent for the second time. Okay, here's the letter in the box job that we would like to throw into the letter and the object of this class. So in the constructor, we initialize the letter field with the letter object that we throw into it, and that's it. We just log it in our logs, and that's it. In the handle method, as I said before, we take this job out of the queue and we want to do something useful with it. But in our case, we will just dispatch this job to another queue. So we'll create a letter in the sorting bin object of this class, and we will initialize it with the same letter that was let into this object here. Okay, and here is the letter in the sorting bin class here. It's a bit more interesting. So the constructor is the same as in there. So we only initialize this field. In handler, we take it out of the queue, and we check whether the city that the letter is supposed to go to is in a defined list of cities. Of course, this is a simplified way of doing this, in order not to show a lot of classes, so that we don't have to jump between things. But this particular case will throw the new exception, and other letters will go to other queues which are responsible for the shipment bins. Of course, in the meantime, we'll put a stamp onto the letter so that something changes in this object. But of course, in a real code, we will do much more than that. Okay, and this is the last one, which is responsible for holding. This is the class of a job that is supposed to be thrown into the shipment bin. So it also does nothing else than just log things in the log, but you can do something, of course, in the handler if you need to. Okay, let's do some work on some jobs. Okay, so in here, I create the letters and I throw them into the box. We only have one box queue, and we throw 999 letters in there, and with some randomized information. And here I will show you how the jobs are being processed by the default worker, the command line worker that I shown you before, not the Laravel Horizon worker, but the command line worker. And in this case, when you run it exactly as you see here with all the queues, it will be done this way. Okay, so what is happening here is actually we fill in the box with 999 entries. Then all these entries are taken out and put into the sorting bin. It means just that a person brings them to the post office. And then they are all processed in the sorting bin and put into the other queues: London shipment, Paris shipment, and New York shipment. Okay, you would say, okay, but how can we optimize this? Because it can clearly be optimized, because there's only one job being processed at the same time. So in here, this list of queues is actually a priority list. So the first thing that will be processed are the jobs that are in the box queue. Second are the jobs that are in the sorting bin. So let's try and switch these. So now the first one is the sorting bin and the second one is box. Let's have a look how it works. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, now you see that the highest priority, which is for the sorting bin, is being used here for processing the letters that are in the sorting bin. And that's why it behaves like this. I have to tell you right now that in practice, you don't run a single worker. In practice, you run multiple workers, and all of these queues will be processed in a very different way. So it will appear as if they were processed at the same time. Here is one more example for the Laravel Horizon configuration. Let's have a look. Okay. So this is a simple configuration. Okay. And here I think I have this version for multiple workers. And as you can see, they are all being processed at the same time. Well, not at the same time, of course, because nothing is happening at the same time in a computer. Maybe except some processes in the CPU, but not here. Okay, so let's go to the failed jobs, because what would happen if your letter was thrown out because your email provider just could not connect to something? It would not be great. So we have to deal somehow with the failed jobs. And in your job class, you can create this failed method in which you can notify the customer, or you can log something in logs that something failed, something went wrong, and this job cannot be processed. The reason for the job to fail may be there may be very different reasons for that. So the first reason, and the most often, I hope, is because an external service cannot process something. You want to contact with an external API, and it does not respond properly, or maybe it does not respond at all, or maybe it's thinking too much about what to say, what to return to your service. And then this is something that does not need any changes in your code. So the only thing that you have to do is to retry all jobs after the external service is fixed. And you can try doing this. Queue, retry all. This will throw all the failed jobs back to the queue, and it will retry all of them. The first command here is queue failed, which is the list of failed jobs, but on the command line, it may be really hard to track this because sometimes there's a lot of jobs. Also, you can flash the queue, which means that all the failed jobs will be removed from the failed jobs queue. You usually don't want to do this before you actually resolve the problem. Okay, so I told you about the first problem, which was an external service failure or something like that. The second problem may be with your code, where you have to fix the code, then you probably have to do some kind of a deploy or something so that you can fix that, and you again retry the jobs. There are two ways in which you can deal with the failed jobs. The first one is that you can just run retry all, and the second one, which is a bit harder to do but can be done, is that you can just process them one by one with some kind of a code, and you will have more control on what you're doing, and maybe you just want to retry a few of them. By the way, there's a parameter that you can pass to the queue retry. It may not be all, but it may be 5 or something like that. So you pass, instead of all, you say 5, and the job will be processed. Okay, by the way, have you ever wondered why it takes so much time sometimes for your password reminder to come from the service that you want to log in? You just forgot the password and you want the password reminder. Because normally emails are pretty fast when it comes to transferring them from one server to another. At least it used to be like that. But nowadays, when you have a lot of spam, and the email providers and they have to deal with this somehow. So they limited the number of emails that can be sent in a given minute, so that they queue all these emails in some place, and it's just throttling, like the throttling that I shown you in the configuration for the Redis queue. They just send, like 1,000 emails per second or something like that. That's why you may be waiting a few minutes for your password reminder email. Yeah, so that's not a good part of this technology. Okay, so here are the places where the queues need to be used. So, for example, if you have some kind of a long processing somewhere in the background running, you don't want the user to stay there and wait on front end to, and make him wait. You just need to be able to run this process in the background and let the user go. And then you can, after the process is done, you can just send an email or something like that to the user to tell him that it's done. And that's a really convenient way for today's requirements, because sometimes it's a lot of processing power to do the job that the user is expecting. Like, for example, process the video processing or audio processing or other cases like this. For notifications, well, this is a perfect case, because notifications don't really need to be a real-time mechanism. They can go in few seconds or minutes. It depends on your on what you're trying to implement, but they can be processed in the background. Also, if you have a data synchronization somewhere in your system, and your system will not be notified by other system that something changed in there and that you have to pull this information. Sometimes you have to pull this information, you have to pull a lot of data in order to find out that something changed. So how can this be organized? You can use the Laravel scheduler, which is a different mechanism. And scheduler allows you to run a process every like 5 minutes. It depends on what you want. And in this process, you may throw some jobs into the queue, which will be responsible for pulling data from external systems. And every single job can represent a separate resource in that external system. So if the handler, if the worker pulls that job out of the queue, then he will try to get this information for you. So the synchronization of the data is another case here. Okay, do you remember that old post office building which I showed you at the beginning of this webinar? Guess what? This is where our headquarters is located. It changed a lot from the inside, and frankly speaking, I'm very happy because of being a part of TSH. Also, I have just found that Clutch.io considered TSH to be the best custom software development company in Poland. We are very happy to see that. And it means that hard work pays off. If you'd like to receive information about upcoming webinars, I strongly encourage you to subscribe to Tech Keeper's Guide, our bi-weekly newsletter for CTOs, tech leads, managers, and developers who want to grow. Despite the webinars, you will find there a carefully selected package articles on technology, business, culture, and leadership. Feel free to join at tsh.io/newsletter. Also, a few months ago, we've published the State of Microservices 2020 report based on a survey filled by over 650 programmers from all around the world who use microservices every day. The report also includes comments from specialists from companies such as DAZN or Microsoft. If you are interested in these issues, please download the report for free or read it online. Okay, now let's go to the questions section. I hope there are some questions in the questions tab. Let's have a look. Okay. Okay. Well, I can make the code available for this example. It's not really very sophisticated, but I can give you some files. Okay. The next question is about the YouTube channel. It was answered. And yes, we were recording, so this will be available. Okay, let's look at the chat section. Maybe there were some things asked. Okay, I think there is one question from Mateusz RK on the chat section. Redis or Rabbit? Well, it depends on your requirements and needs and what you already have in your infrastructure. So I would say Redis is enough for most of the things that I do personally. But if you want to have something specialized and you feel better with having that on your infrastructure, then RabbitMQ would be the better choice. Okay, I understand. I would say Redis is easier to implement in the infrastructure, but that's really up to you. I would use Rabbit for more sophisticated systems. Okay, I see no other questions. Thank you very much for being here. And I hope you'll be watching for other webinars from TSH. Have a nice day. Thanks. Bye.